Friday. There we go. Hello, everyone, creatives, community, kind folks out there, and of course, everyone over on Fantasy Grounds Discord, our classmates and collegiates, and everyone in between. Thank you very much. For those who do not know, we go live Monday through Friday, demi-daily, and we also are associated with Fantasy Grounds College. We are guest speakers here on RPG with DBJ. So if you would prefer to have an audio version, please go over to Fantasy Grounds College and go to the bottom of the below the classrooms, and you can listen in on the audio. And also while you're there, join in and participate in Fantasy Grounds College if you'd like to learn how to use the virtual tabletop, as well as listening in on the audio with us today. And of course, there's the chat channel as well on Discord if you prefer to use maybe a longer form version of using the chat. So we welcome that as well. But today is Future Friday, and we are coming to the end of our weekly theme, which was Tech Arcana, the idea of the mysticism, the unknown, the special powers, I guess, in your tabletop RPG game, and disseminating it amongst the common folk, having people becoming comfortable with the idea that there are people casting spells or using psionic abilities or shape changing in the streets or something like that. Maybe not quite that bad, but yes, about how societies, essentially world building in which there's at least a sizable portion of the population that's very familiar with the function of what we would consider extraordinary abilities. So we get to today, Future Friday, which means Future Friday incorporates our modern day all the way to the far future, and any deviation from that, whether it's post-apocalyptic or an idyllic mass intergalactic society or anything in between thereof. And now for today, this
sounds like a small task to me.
Yes, you're covering. We forget that science fiction covers just as much territory as our like medieval-ish world building as well. So
I think even more sometimes, but yeah. By the way, I'm Vincent Shine. I'm joining today again.
Yeah, I'm getting to you. Yes, Vince is joining me here. Sometimes my neural bandwidth. Yeah,
neural bandwidth. Okay.
Yeah, it starts to short out, and I absolutely positively love having someone here who can offer some insight and challenge things and come at these themes from a different angle, and I find that incredibly insightful. So thank you very much, Vince, for joining me.
No problem.
All right. Okay. So, but we've got to narrow this down a little bit more. All right. So let's narrow this down a little bit. Let's presume that Zevron's in the chat says medieval-ish perfectly sums up D&D. Yeah, it's not medieval. It is, I suppose we could classify it. Maybe we could come up with a new term. Not ancient, not, I don't know. All right, so
it's a conglomerate.
Yeah, yeah, medieval adjacent. Absolutely.
It's basically just past fiction.
It very much is. And for those who are thinking of medieval societies, it's like there's like clockwork beasts and levels of technology, the likes of which
you always have these ancient civilizations too, where you have something similar to Romans or Egyptians or stuff like that.
Yeah.
At the same time as other medieval societies. So,
But as long as what about D20 modern? Oh man, that's a flash from the past. But I think some people still swear by D20 modern. But today, okay, so here is the yeah, past fiction kind of. So today, of course. Yep. Now, when it comes to modern into far future settings and such, and we start bringing up technology and arcana, normally what happens in far science fiction, magic starts to fade away, or rather, magic becomes there's like a reversal where magic starts becoming this soft form of energy in a descriptive sense. So technology skyrockets, and I'm saying this very generalized, right? In our settings, that technology skyrockets. We've got cybernetics and AI and robots and navigation systems and habitats that are zero gravity and on planets. But the mysticism of in science fiction tends to fade away into the background. Although Zeb
Well,
says in Shadowrun,
it
uh,
depends on the setting very
right,
much and how hard the sci-fi is you're using. If you're at hard sci-fi, you basically have no magic at all anymore. And if you're very soft sci-fi, then you basically have the psionics and mystic beings and godlike beings and stuff like that still present.
right, and so, for a setting like Zevron brings up Shadowrun, I would absolutely add in Star Wars to that. Basically, a bunch of people who have access to like psionic abilities. There are other systems where.
Dune,
Ooh, say again.
Dune.
Oh, Dune. That's right. Uh, Dune has a a form of abilities and powers that are not quite understood by technological standards. Now,
Yeah.
in taking Shadowrun, for example, they have created a system where magic and science have kind of combined together. And the idea of the magic is that there are individuals, there's a portion of society that understands the magic relatively well and its capabilities, and that's where we're going today, where we want to talk about futuristic worlds where there is something extraordinary but people understand it. And I think we have a couple of classes with that. I'm not sure if I should call you Poopsmith or Boffrin. I like Poopsmith though, although that might be to call you that very often might be offensive. But Poopsmith brings up Rifts. Rifts is another setting where mystic elements can come from one dimension, whereas either is fine. Cool. Where mystic elements can come from one dimension, but from the other dimension, maybe there's like high technology. Like for example, the Earth is the nexus for these creatures and beings and entities coming from other dimensions, and they come into our world and mix together.
For example. You also have the setting of something like Numenera, where you have relics of a very very high technology civilization, and you can use those. It's similar to Stargate in a way, where you have the Stargates which were erected by this ancient race, but you don't really know how to replicate them anymore, so you can just use the technology instead of manipulating them very much.
Right, where we know some of how it works, but not everything.
Yeah, you can't build a Stargate, for example, in Stargate.
Right, correct. They know the sequences to go through the Stargates, as far as how to construct one, who built one, in general.
They can manipulate it somewhat. They have some control over it, but it's always incomplete and they can't replicate it.
Yep. Um, I, uh, I, I believe that is that's a common trope, and I think it's quite useful as well, especially. Mhm.
Hmm?
Yep, absolutely. Now, Poopsmith brings up Warhammer 40K. That's another one where the the mysticism of the world has been embraced by the various warring factions. Although, again, not understanding it completely. In 40K, there's a chance that you may be corrupted by, or I'm trying to be generalized here. There's those who use the abilities sometimes lose control of those abilities. It may affect them psychologically or even physically by, not mastering their abilities. And I find in higher tech societies that is a case, that either there's something alien that we kind of know how it works, but we don't know completely. It's even been incorporated into, say, warp travel or starships or something, that
Yeah.
there are engines that can take us from place to place, but we don't understand how it works, or something folds time and space, and it's not for us to understand it. It's just for us to use it and use the energies and fuel these engines, but we don't really want to look inside.
There's always this weird material X or energy X which we can use, and we don't know how it works, but it does work and helps us doing stuff which is normally impossible. There's also this trope about that we can create AI that can do stuff that we don't understand ourselves, but it's very useful. But they always go rogue, so
Yeah, even I would kind of suggest even the concept of the movie was Minority Report, where there's a police force that can predict crimes, and there's a time limit, and the police force goes around searching for basically being pre-crime enforcers, and even the police officer, and this is just the plot of the movie, the police officer doesn't even know quite how the system works until thrown into it, and then the pre-crime finds out that he's accused of committing a crime, and then there's a race against time to find out that he's like, I'm not.
He will commit a crime, I think was the case.
Yes, the system, the idea was the system was flawless. It will predict you committing a lethal crime in the future, and this individual, the main character, is like, I have no reason to want to kill someone, yet the system is perfect, and if it is perfect, that means the main character will kill someone, but they're fighting against the system to prove that that's not the case.
Yeah, and he kills a shit ton of people in the process of proving that he won't kill someone.
Correct, right? Exactly. There's a predestination, right? You acting against a particular
prophecy,
right, ends up making it happen and such. Yeah,
it's also a trope when it comes to prophecies or future sight. The fact that you hear the prophecy makes the prophecy come true, or that you try to act against it.
Yeah. Zevran says, I'm innocent, I'll prove it. Kills people in a movie. Yeah, absolutely. I kind of scratched my head on that one, like, wait a minute, didn't you kill people before you killed the person that they said you were going to kill in the first place? But whatever. But maybe not.
The big question is, back to topic, how do we normalize these things then in our settings?
Exactly. Poopsmith brings up the fact that Star Trek had some psychic powers, and there are races in the Star Trek expanded universe that have an association with psychic abilities.
Yeah, there are some really powerful beings, and there's also these with limited telepathy, or how it's called with emotions, emotional what empathy.
Yes, empathy, and like an empathic sense. I can sense that they are angry or sad or asleep or hungry or something of that nature.
Yeah, unless it doesn't suit the plot, then you can't for some reason.
Yes, absolutely. Oh man, yeah. So now, Poopsmith brings up Vulcans and Beta Z or Beta Zeds?
Yeah, Beta Zeds. Yeah,
Beta Zeds.
These are those who are true telepath, and if you have a half Beta Z, then you have an empath.
Yeah, a boyfriend. I don't know the spelling either. You're perfectly fine there, too. Um, but I think I'm going to bring up a general problem with science fiction as far as tabletop goes, and just follow me on this, which is why the extraordinary portions of it complicate things. And I've heard this from individuals who say that they would love to do science fiction, but here's their issue with using it. Um, in our fake pseudo medieval settings, it's very easy to accept the fact and to reconcile the fact that someone's walking around with a sword and a shield or a staff, and they walk up and down roads, and their effect on society in general is only as far as their hands can touch, right? They've got a shield or a whip or a bow and arrow, and that's about it. And then you layer on top of that magic. A few people know magic, but there you can layer on top of that magic. But in science fiction, one of the complaints I've heard, and I actually agree with it, although it varies from person to person, is that some people who try to game master science fiction, they feel like they have to keep track of the science of it so much that it's very difficult to then layer on top of that the fiction, meaning that beyond our modern day of having cell phones and computers and automobiles, when you start to go further into the future, you have things like starships and altered gravity and AIs and robots and things. Um, and
You mean
unfortunately,
that you always have to explain these things in some way, or what's the
well,
problem?
well, in the fact that they exist in the for the common individual, they exist in the background, and some people find that it's uh I'm talking gaming wise, that if the NPCs have access to this other technology, whatever that technology may be, cybernetic systems, being able to hack into computers, having uh, all purely scientific, that they find that rationalizing that in their head can be a little bit difficult. For example, PCs are shadow runners in Shadowrun. They're cybernetic individuals running around in this near future dystopian world. And then as the game master, I have to say, well, that corporate headquarters probably would have hackers, so I have to include them. And they probably would have some kind of maybe AI security system. So I have to think about that. And then you layer on top of Shadowrun magic. So would the corporate headquarters also have
Oh, yeah, yeah.
a council of wizards?
I
And
get what you mean. You have to add too many layers to the game so that you don't know what to include and what to leave out. And if you think you leave something out, then you think you make it too easy for a certain type of players, for example, or too hard, maybe.
yes,
I
I, I
I get the problem in I think in Shadowrun it's the worst case because you have the normal characters, then you have the magic characters, and you have the
yeah,
hackers, and you
ex-
have to kind of take care of all three of the aspects all the time.
yep. Now I just want to remind you that for some reason we can't hear you, Vince, in the Discord. I hear you on YouTube, but I don't hear you in the Discord. And from my point of view, you are unmuted.
You are muted for me in Discord for some reason. I think last time it did work.
Yeah, and I have to agree with you. Like that overlay can be kind of difficult to
I try
juggle.
to join again. Let's try that.
Sure. Now, Zev saying rationalizing magic is the same, DBJ. I still have to explain how some spells can't be done because you can't move your hands, or how some spells burn components and others don't. I think it's a product of rules complicating narratives. And in many ways, I do agree with you. And I feel like, now I'm not saying that I bring the problem up because it's a real thing. There are many players and game masters that do have that problem.
I think my Discord crashed. I have to start it again. Sorry.
No problem. But I do feel that there is that problem, and like you're saying, Zev, that sometimes the rules can complicate the narrative a bit, because we are trying to we're trying to fit the pieces together, which meaning the rule system, versus embracing the setting first. So, for example, we completely accept the fact that there are Force users in Star Wars, right? Or we completely accept the fact that in Star Trek there are aliens who have like empathic abilities, or that they come across maybe an alien race that has the Vulcans, for example, have a trained limited form of psychic abilities, or I guess we would call them psychic abilities, and we just accept it. But when it comes down to the nitty gritty of using our high-tech worlds, it can be a little disconcerting. For example, we're in a world such as place like, say, an eclipse phase styled world where it's like transhumanist. We've expanded it beyond our own gravity well, and we've gone out to our own planets in our own solar system. And one of the players is like, oh, I want to play one of the Lost, which in that game, they are fast-grown individuals who have psychic abilities, but they are driven insane by their psychic abilities. And you go, okay, that's fine. Well, what happens around individuals that don't have those psychic abilities? What happens when you design your adventure and one of the PCs goes, well, I'm just going to stay in my starship and read everyone's mind inside of the space habitat. And then, the game master's like face planting, like, don't, man, I forgot about that part.
You also have this big problem always. If these players have a spaceship, why don't they just shoot everything with their spaceship?
Exactly. Or they have a spaceship, they cause all kinds of havoc, and they say, yeah, we're just going to leave. Wait, what? Yeah, we're just going to leave the planet. We don't really care what happens there. Wait, you just caused the deaths of millions and thrown this place into a complete chaos. And we're just going to leave. We're going to hyperspace out of there. They can't track us through hyperspace anyway. And again, I'm going to go back to like Zev saying, like, it's just a product of the rules complicating the narrative, where a portion of us not only accepting the fact that maybe one or more of the PCs can do something, is us accepting that the world.
Hello? Sorry, I got to check Discord.
I hear you.
Okay, good. Sorry.
Yep. You're fine. It's us accepting the fact that the world in general understands that individual or that type of individual exists in some kind of way, shape, or form, whether it's something along the lines of a corporate headquarters has I don't know, some kind of energy field or sound, or some form of neuroelectrical disruption that hinders or prevents the reading of minds inside of the corporate headquarters or something. And I listen, I do understand that keeping track of the physical world, the internet of the world, whatever it may be, the mesh, the web, whatever it's called, and the spiritual part of the world, whether it's something psionic and there's like telepathic powers, whether there's a literal spirit realm, whether there is another dimension where warp travel happens, keeping track of all that amongst the average population. I think we could borrow something from what we talked about in the very beginning of the week about folklore, that incorporating something into it where everyone knows that people with these abilities,
maybe they have special tattoos, or maybe they have some tag on them that glows when they're using their abilities or whatever. There should be some way to keep those abilities in check and
Yeah.
to let people know, hey, this individual may be dangerous in some way. Also, I personally think it's not that big of a problem to take care of these things. You can sometimes just ignore putting these aspects in, and yeah, that makes it maybe sometimes easier or harder for some players, but then work with the consequences. So for example, if you have a mission in Shadowrun and you don't include your mages, and the mage just steamrolls the whole run, then you have to see that the corporates are like, okay, there was a mage and he made a big problem for us. Now we send mages to hunt this mage specifically, or maybe we include the security for magic substantially now. That you have to work with consequences instead of precautions for everything.
True, but I could understand that happening. And to combine that with something Zevron says is he brings up, and sometimes people don't like having the tech or magic explained to them. Metachlorians were mentioned twice in episode 1 of Star Wars, and never again ever. Sometimes it works best to just say the technology works, moving on. And I feel like, because we've brought this up this week, and I kind of feel like this can be a theme for another week. I'm still not certain whether it would extend out for 5 days, but many of us, we tend to be a brilliant sort when it comes to tabletop role playing. We are well read, we are very creative, and we embrace very strange modes of thinking, which is a great thing, right? We can put ourselves in someone else's position in very extraordinary circumstances. And the problem I think that we have amongst ourselves as a community is that we love finding out. We love discovery. We love finding out how things work. We want answers. We crave answers. And some of our favorite intellectual properties, whether it's Harry Potter, whether it's Star Wars, whether it's any number, Dune is another one.
Marvel Universe, whatever.
Marvel Universe. There are people who are out there dedicated to finding every little nuance they can find, explaining every little thing in their particular intellectual properties. But the problem comes about where there's no mystery left, and then everything becomes explainable. And once it becomes explainable, you start having arguments over just how explainable it is. Right?
Yeah, I personally don't like this trend. I know we always tend to do that, trying to explain how the Force works, trying to explain how certain psionic abilities works, explaining how the technology of the spaceships work or whatever. But certainly there are things you just have to accept as part of a story and don't try to think too much about it. And also, in tabletop RPGs, you always have this problem that players find certain loopholes or problems and then try to exploit them. And there's for example, there's this great example in Shadowrun where hackers try to hide their ID by just wearing a lot of fake IDs with them, a lot of fake chips, so other hackers can't find their true Matrix ID because there's so much that they can't search them all. And I always think when you try to do that as a GM, okay, maybe it works one time, maybe it works 2 times, but then the opposition might have heard about it and then they try to find a workaround. So I always try to think about it in what is good for the game and not what is good for this, not what makes sense logically.
Yeah. Absolutely. Brawford mentioned the Psi Corps in Babylon 5. Navy used Babylon 5 made them wear distinctive clothing. And it says, to be fair, US Navy used that method for subs GPS. Referring to like the ability to send out so many messages that it's hard to find the correct one in the it's like an exploit, right? Where it's everyone wearing the same mask in a large group of protesters, or hackers use that as an exploit to shut down corporations today, where they use a program that constantly keeps asking another website for authentication, and it shuts it down because they're getting too much information. It's Barfrin says, or blend into the crowd. It's you're not invisible, you're just in a group of other people, like dressed the same, or so much chaos. It's the hero or the villain disappearing in a festival, right? There's so many people, there's so much noise, there's so much activity that you become invisible due to the things around you. But there's something that a writer, one of my favorite writers, has mentioned before, and they said, I'm paraphrasing here, but they said when they write and they start to world build before they start writing a novel, they create the magic for their world and then they break it. That they take the concept that before the main characters take a step into the world, somebody else had the idea before this came about, right? It's like you said, there's always players who are looking for loopholes. The search for loopholes has always happened long before the first level characters started trying to find a loophole. Like, I'm going to use charm monster, and then I'm going to use feign death on that monster, and then I'm going to cut their throats, and I can get around, I can kill just about anything by using, right?
Conjure up a huge block of adamantite and just crush the enemy under it or whatever.
Right. That in the world, people have already are obsessed with exploits, right? In our own world, there are people who are masters of exploiting the rules, whether the rules are legal, whether the rules are economic, whether the rules are physical rules of the world, right? Someone's trying to exploit it. That's why we have planes. We have aircraft today because someone exploited the ability to fly. They're like, you know what? I'm going to figure out how to fly one way or another, and the technology came about. And I believe the same would work for extraordinary abilities, psychic abilities, and things like that. The Dead Man brings up Eclipse Phase, talks about the Panopticon supplement. The Panopticon supplement covers that fairly well in terms of talking about the exploiting the psychic abilities. If for those who don't know, Panopticon is a supplement for Eclipse Phase that deals with surveillance, because in the future they accept the fact that there is something known as susveillance, meaning like there's surveillance everywhere. Everything's being recorded and tracked all the time, everywhere. So how do you commit a crime? It also deals with the people that have these psychic abilities. It deals with uplifted animals. It deals with AI and hackers and computer systems that are on all the time trying to be exploited, and it deals with that. And I think one of the main things that you guys brought up, Dead Man and Balfrin and Zevron bring up, and yourself, is that we could narratively, we can explain that within this world, maybe it's not the fact that that these systems are unique. Maybe there's just so many of them that it's very difficult to find what you're looking for in a big it's the needle in the haystack, or what some people say, finding the one needle in a pile of needles.
If you ever try to Google something, you pretty much know what this means. Something very specific. If you try to find something very ordinary, it's super easy. But when you try to find something super specific, then you get a super shit ton of noise, where you find something that is adjacent but not what you are searching for, and that's basically the crux of it.
Yeah. And like you mentioned before, where you're saying, let's say the corporate headquarters has been assaulted once, twice, three times. Okay, now at this point, they're going to have defenses against that, right? There's only so many hackers and only so many bring up Shadowrun again, there's only so many wizards that have tried to break into their corporate headquarters that they're not going to tolerate it anymore, any longer. And
yeah, I think Shadowrun is pretty much the worst example of this problem, I think, because you always have had these 3 layers, and there used to be a time where you could basically do the run for the wizard and the hacker before the run even started, because they are completely different dimensions where they are using their abilities, and you're like, what the fuck? Yeah,
yeah,
why should I think about 3 things for one run all the time? On top of the normal stuff you have to take care, like the target and stuff, and you always just to think, okay, how does it looks in the magic plane, and how does it look in the matrix? And oh man, why do they need to make so much work for the GMs all the time?
yeah, it is very, very difficult. But even Barford mentions like how many car drivers understand internal combustion engines. So there's many car drivers who are unfamiliar with the term internal combustion and engine in the first place, right? Key into slot, turn car on. That's basically it, right? There's plenty
Test
of
1 2
people.
check. Can you hear me on Discord again?
I think you may have faded out again. Yeah,
Oh
Discord's
man.
acting up. Yeah,
what's
yeah.
going on with
I don't know. Or Boffin adds to that, or computer users understanding how a CPU works. I'm probably one of those who's like, I don't know how that works. Zev says Decker's really ruined Shadowrun, or the Decker hacker thing. Yeah. Now, I'm going to go back up to something Zevron says as well, talking about the Brandon Sanderson. Sanderson has the rules of magic, talking about, if you're unfamiliar, Brandon Sanderson has a treatise on soft magic and hard magic. And you can very easily replace the words hard magic and soft magic with the words technology or psionics or in anything. It's replaceable. The word magic being replaced with anything extraordinary in your world. And he says the number one rule, of course, it depends on the story, right? Meaning that in our own settings, in the way we want to have things operate in our own world, at our own table, we can come together and say, hey, listen, I would love to run Shadowrun, but I'm having a hard time juggling all of these extra aspects. I would really like to tone down the extent of magic and the extent of hackers and deckers. I would really like to tone that down.
And I have seen games where they actually done that, where they said, where the GM actually talked to the hacker before the game started and said, okay, see, I don't want to give you like more screen time than everyone else all the time, because they have to describe the hacking and the hackers duels and whatever. So we will just handle hacking with a couple of roles all the time, and don't go into the metrics and stuff, or only on key moments. And then we will handle it that way. And it actually worked, even though the player wasn't perfectly happy with it, but they tried to offset it with giving him some cool moments in some specific times, and making this thing much faster for him. So, for example, if you wanted to get information, you would just make a hacking check, or if you wanted to open a door, you would just make a hacking check, and that's it.
Yep. I think it took a long time for them to realize this, but sometimes how we picture something really working in our real world. For example, we understand that computers and hackers, there are things happening multiple times a microsecond versus someone pulling a gun and trying to shoot someone else, right? We understand that that's how it, air quotes, really works in the real world. But gaming wise, the rules don't have to duplicate what happens in the real world. It just has to implement how we feel it would work in the real world. And I'm saying something very long to come back to exactly what you just said. If I have a skill roll, I shoot my gun. I have a skill roll, I drive my car. I make a skill roll, I climb that fence. The same thing could be done for, say, a hacker. I make a skill roll. Okay, you open that door. I make a skill roll. Okay, you find the file you're looking for. You know, it. This brings up another. I guess we're going into a. This makes me think of going into another direction in terms of tabletop gaming, where we narratively we can assume magic, extraordinary things in a very mundane skill, or assume something mundane in a super science manner. And what I'm saying is, you could have we could very much say a character in a world with a very high persuasive skill, no special abilities at all, but my character has very high persuasive skill in this science fiction setting. We could describe that as psionics, even though that character does not have a psionic ability. Um, Maybe a character with a skill level that is at a rank that is far, they've maybe spent points on it, or they've earned this kind of thing, that in order to get my +2 bonus, that +2 bonus is described as pheromones or hypnotic sound, or me using my psychic abilities trained from birth, from the alien world I come
Yeah,
from.
or you could just say that certain abilities just add functionalities to these abilities. So, for example, if you're good at hacking, then you can use your electronic skill at a range.
Exactly. Hey, I can use my, I don't know, investigation skill, like you said, at a range, right? Oh, I guess that makes sense. Sure, for your character, fine. Roll your investigation skill, against a particular difficulty. Oh, did you make it? Did you miss? Oh, you barely made it. Okay, well, you get this information, and then we can just move on to the other characters and spread that spotlight around without being caught up in having a micro game of hacking and a micro game of traveling through the spirit world.
They kind of do that in Blades in the Dark, where you have these whisper characters. They can interact with ghosts and stuff like that, but they don't have an own dimension. And basically, all they can do is just a normal role, but it's a lot of times it's just more dangerous than normal roles, but they can accomplish more than a normal character can.
Exactly. They have, maybe there's a, like you added, I can use this ability at a range. I can use this ability against more than one individual. It's a Barfrin brings up the fact that that sounds a lot like Savage Worlds and Trapping's abilities or edges or powers, meaning that to go into a slight detail about what Barfrin is talking about Savage Worlds. In Savage Worlds, they have a very common set of abilities, and then if you match a descriptor, a trigger, an edge to it, it changes how it functions. So bringing up your example, Vince, about being able to hack from a range, it's essentially, I want to make a character that has the ability to investigate things, but I'm going to add to that a descriptor that says I'm able to use this at a range, or I'm able to use this ability. I'm
On
able
dead
to
people or whatever.
correct, right? I can persuade someone and then attach to that dead people, right? Um, I
I
can
can use my jumping skill to fly for a short distance, whatever.
exactly, and we could. That's not specific to Savage Worlds. That's in Savage Worlds. It's in Fate. It's in a number of games, and especially a lot of indie games, because it's a very simple. It's a very simple way to say, you know what? How about we just attach this to your particular skills and be done with it? As a matter of fact, Dungeons and Dragons kind of does this, but it isn't exploited. When a spellcaster uses their arcane casting ability, they roll a die, a d20, like anyone would strike someone with a sword or try to climb a fence. They roll a d20 and use their arcane ability to achieve a certain effect. That skill roll could duplicate something like a hacking role, right? I want to use my arcane ability, a generalized. I want to use magic to understand what's going on ahead of me, or to unravel the how the door is locked, or undo this special effect that is casting an illusion. It is a skill roll that is flavored with an arcane effect. Kind of what Zevron is talking about in the chat, where he says, I'd love to see magic treated like coding in modern day by wizards, just very stressed out individuals who make the string of formula perfect, and it still doesn't work for hours until they kick it. Which is which is actually kind of funny, right? He's talking about, did you jiggle the incense, but it is very true. We could instead of trying to find out what kind of spell-like abilities or whatever, you could make a hazard where you say, hey guys, guess what? You're trapped in a room that has an arcane weave around it, and you can't escape until the spellcaster unlocks the weave, and you need to make 3 successful arcane checks to undo it. There's no specific spell, there's no specific, it's just make a skill roll, except your character is the only one who has the specific skill to do it.
Yeah, they sometimes do this stuff in Shadowrun too. For example, if you got a magic barrier or a physical barrier or stuff like that, then you have different ways to get in. You can either break it through damage, or you can try to sneak in, just phase through it. And they try to make rules up for that, and I'm always thinking, why don't they just say, okay, it works basically like you would climb a wall or break through the wall. It's basically the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, it really, a lot of times things just break down to narrative. Like you said, are you climbing the wall or are you breaking through the wall? It ultimately it's the end result that matters. How you got to that end result sometimes is just a narrative effect and doesn't really matter.
And I feel like a lot of old games try to focus on simulating the world, trying to add these special systems all the time. And the newer systems try to work it in a narrative way, where they are focused on the result and not on the specific method or the emulation of a world in a sense. And I personally tend to prefer those who are result orientated, and where the GM tries to ask, okay, what do you want to accomplish doing that?
Mm-hmm. There are plenty of games. I want to say Blades in the Dark does this, where you can perform an action and there really isn't even a specific attribute that attaches to it. It is saying, okay, you want to accomplish something, and me as the GM running the game will say, all right, well, how do you want to accomplish it? Are you using something forceful? Are you being charismatic to accomplish this? Are you being very intelligent and being very careful or something? Are you being conniving or being persuasive to accomplish this thing? Or are you using brute force? So
again, Blades does this really well, because the players decide what attributes they roll. They say what they want to accomplish, then decide what attribute they roll, and then the GM modifies how the consequences and the effect of the roll, based on what they describe first.
Absolutely. Dead Man the Storyteller says Warhammer 40K actually has that as a rule, talking about a skill roll to accomplish something, even if it has a supernatural attachment to it, right? It's and even Barfram brings up Mage the Ascension. It's a White Wolf game, and Mage the Ascension has something like that, where it has magical macro keys and rotes, where essentially it is constructing a magic spell, but really all it's doing is it is allowing you to use a skill in a manner in which your average citizen cannot use that skill. I think Zev's picking with you there, Vince, being sarcastic there.
I honestly don't know what he means, but okay.
No, I think it works for me too, because I'm a very wordy person myself.
Yeah.
But that being said, a perfect example of allowing the narrative to sit and then letting the players decide how to work it would be trying to push through a crowd of bystanders, right? One player can say, I want to use my persuasion, charisma, whatever statistic it is, to push through the crowd. I want to be convincing. I want to say, pardon me, excuse me. Oh, excuse me, I need to get through here. Or there's an emergency, pardon me, I need to get here. I want to be as inoffensive as possible to push through a crowd as fast as I can. Whereas another player may say, well, listen, I'm very graceful. I'm just going to slip through the crowd as fast as I can. I'm going to move and dodge and slip aside and tap someone on the shoulder and get behind them because I'm very graceful. And then whereas there's a third individual may say, look, I've got muscles. I'm just going to push everyone out of my way. All three being very logical methods to solve the situation.
Yeah, but the pitfall of these methods is always that you try to not let the players do stuff which don't make sense. There's this example in some games where you try to break down a tower with a sledgehammer by yourself, and the GM just has to have the courage of saying, okay, you are alone, you only have a sledgehammer, these walls are like 1 meter thick, you have no chance doing that in any perceivable amount of time. It would take fucking days. Try something else, it doesn't work.
Sometimes when players come up with ridiculous solutions to things, right? Like okay, you fall off the cliff. Well, I'm going to flap my arms, right? It's we have to accept that certain things in the world, we have come together as a group and decided that there is a level of verisimilitude, of realism, that we have agreed that some things are possible by the PCs and NPCs and some things are not possible. And now as a game master or dungeon master, I think we should let the players know your character is smart enough to understand the sledgehammer will not knock the tower down. Period. You already know this. It's not something that's a surprise. It's not I've heard people suggest, well, if somebody wants to do something, I will just give them a die roll. I think that's a little bit
you should sometimes deny them, yeah. But
right.
That also depends on the level of realism the world has you are playing in. It's a very different world when you're trying to take some gritty crime investigation game than when you try to copy a wushu movie where everyone can fly, basically, by just tapping a little bit and walking on top of trees and stuff like that. If you in a setting like that, then falling down a cliff is maybe not that big of a problem.
Absolutely. If, like you said, if it's some kind of wushu, or if it's like, we picked with 80s action movies the other day when we got out of the chat, and how some things are quite ridiculous. The hero getting shot 50 times and still walking around. If we have decided that's the way the world works, then fine. That's fine. But if we've decided to embrace this very realistic, gritty, wartime world where, one errant gunshot will just take you out, then no, if a player says, I'm going to flap my arms and try to fly when I jump off the building, and the GM going, well, advice says I should at least give them a die roll, is a little ridiculous, right? It's the no, or it may be a matter of, it's not going to work the way you think it will. I will give you a die roll to maybe save your
maybe there's a branch hanging out somewhere and you fall on that or whatever.
Right. It's the, yes, I may give you a roll, but no, the end result may not be what you think it will be, because it may not fit for the particular situation. Balford says, is the sledgehammer doing mega damage? Yeah. It depends on the game system. Oh man, you guys are so, but it is true that sometimes we could if we're talking about extraordinary things happening in the world and people getting used to it, there could be. All right, see if I can just kind of describe this. Um, it's a possibility that the world operates in a manner that, unless the players really go out of their way to perform certain actions, they're unable to do those things. So maybe um, there's a natural barrier to the players doing something. So, for example, in the chats they were talking about like magical keys or electronic keys. It could be that maybe everyone agrees that in order to use your psychic abilities, you must first concentrate very hard to do so, or it causes some form of exhaustion, or maybe there's a meta part of the game where yes, your character has psychic abilities that no one else has, but it also draws the attention of something otherworldly or sets off alarms, or your your body is easier to sense with technological sensors. Maybe you give
Yeah, or
off a
you
lot of
get
heat.
corrupted. There are like
Yep.
tons of possible restrictions. Maybe you
Hmm.
need a drug taken constantly, or else you would get all insane, or your powers would destroy you, or whatever.
Hmm. The I mean, we've seen this in narratives. Maybe the hacker or the decker, maybe in this world they have to I don't want to say download, they have to interface, they have to take a cord, plug it into their temple or their neck or something, and plug into a system. So maybe the PC is temporarily unconscious or paralyzed or something in order to use their abilities in this particular setting. And therefore, yes, they have these greater abilities, but they also have a liability behind it. And
Yeah, I think that's the best part about it, because you have to cover different things for different characters. You have to protect the mage, for example. You have to protect the hacker. You have to find an interface for them or whatever, and then you can work together.
Yep. Now I have to laugh because I remember this episode. Balfrin talks about an old GI Joe where Storm Shadow takes out an HISS, a hiss tank, barehanded while doing a demo for Cobra Ninjas. If for those who don't know, Storm Shadow is like the ultimate ninja wearing wearing white as a ninja, and uses martial arts to literally dismantle a tank with his hands and feet. It's um if
I
we
mean, if
accept that.
that's your style, sure, go for it.
Right, exactly. And like you said, maybe we can also, as GMs or DMs or whatever in our games, we can also complicate situations. So instead of saying, oh, make one roll to hack this corporate headquarters and get all the information you need, maybe there are a series of skill rolls to both break into the system, and also maybe there needs to be a number of skill rolls to retreat out of the system and not be tracked or
Yet,
traced or trapped when escaping, right? So
not
yes,
leave any trails back to you.
right, your hacking roll did break through the firewall. Your next hacking roll did find the file you're looking for, but it is it's
You
not
left
corrupt.
your code somewhere or whatever.
Yep. So okay, you have the file. So now you have to break the file on the code. You have to get the encryption key. Oh, by the way, you left a trail. So now you have to cover your data trail, or you've left, I don't know, some kind of GPS trail leading to where you're at, and you need to make a roll so that to find out how long the authorities will find out where you're located. And oh, they have a
Yeah, they try to incorporate something like that in Shadowrun 5, where you have an Overwatch score, and if the Overwatch score goes to a certain point, then the super hackers from the government have basically found you and hacked you, and now you're unconscious, and the squad team is on your way, something like that. So you basically had to log out in regular periods to stop your trail taking to you, which is weird, but kind of get what they're trying to do.
yeah, it's difficult to to describe what they're trying to describe, right? Like it's like we get what they're going for, but sometimes the execution of it is very difficult when you're writing a book to get other people to embrace it. But right, they're trying to solve a problem in terms of getting the hacker character involved in the action, instead of them saying, no, I'm 1,000 miles away, don't worry about it, guys, I'm there from very
Yeah.
far away and helping you guys out.
But you could make things so much different for them. For example, make it so that it's super easy to hack someone when they give you access, if they know it or not, which is something that real hackers use all the time. Like, get this person inside the network to press this link, for example. And
true.
That's something you could use, could make a social hacker, which just
Yep.
use this method all the time, instead of just having the typical, I'm just tapping at my keyboard for a certain amount of time and suddenly I'm in, which is super boring from a storytelling perspective.
Exactly. Now we've gotten to the hour mark, so we're gearing down here, so we can squirrel ourselves a little bit. Tesla Ranger brings up the inverse proportional ninja ability. It says in any martial arts fight, there's only a finite amount of ninjutsu. As a result, one ninja is a deadly threat, but an army of them are cannon fodder. Yeah, that's the inverse ninja a theorem that
Sad but true.
yeah, the less ninjas, the more the better skilled they are. And I think that's pretty universal. I'm pretty sure that's a real thing. Barfin
Not
says,
not a Naruto, but that's it basically.
right. Being idiotic here, just being silly. But Barfin brings up Deadlands. With hucksters. For those who don't know, Deadlands role-playing game is a fictional fictional classic cowboys western setting with like the undead and spirits and all that kind of stuff. It's the wild west turned with the volume turned way up. And he says they do magic but have to beat an evil spirit in a hand of poker to do it, which is kind of to me brings up what you talked about the social hacker in terms of maybe it's not just making a hacking roll, but convincing systems to let you bypass those systems, or psychic abilities that you have to beseech the powers to allow you to perform some kind of action before it can be done.
Yeah, maybe you have to get into their head, maybe get into their dreams, and they have to get through their mental defenses first, which are represented by characters inside the head or whatever. You could make up stuff. And I'm pretty certain in Changed in the Lost, you can sometimes help characters with mental problems when you go into their dreams and find out what their problems are in a deep psychological meaning, and then try to fix that. I've seen a campaign where they basically have a psychiatrist office and working as a group of changelings. So they are just talking to their clients, and then in the night they go into their dreams and fix their problems.
See, that's a great concept too, and what a great way to like have this other world kind of thing, like this other place. And mind you, you could use the exact same concept for the psychic in the group that's in the far future, where, oh, by the way, you have to go into the dreams of this unconscious individual to question them about their evil plans, right? But they're unconscious, or they're asleep, or they're in a coma, or they're in a stasis field. And so, no, the other players can't question them. They're, in cold sleep, but the psychic character can still use their charisma abilities.
And maybe he can even take others with him because he needs them to whatever.
Yep. And who's to say that the trade-off for the psychic character is, oh, by the way, people who are asleep or unconscious or injured or in another mental state can also talk to you and affect you. And confuse you, meaning like maybe the psychic character who doesn't want to be near a hospital because the people in the hospital are in a in-between state, whereas the other players are like, I don't feel anything, it's no big deal. But those in the hospital might be trying to confound the psychic character. So it's the, yeah, I'm going to add it's adding an obstacle to the character who also has the greater ability to do something someone else can't do, which will kind of equalize their abilities. But we've come to the hour mark. For those of you watching on YouTube, thank you very much. We were going to end this rambly kind of thing that we did all week, but I hope you found some information from this. Yeah, and lastly, next week, I think we're going to do a whole week of one simple thing that is a huge problem in tabletop RPGs, and we're going to solve it, or rather, we're just going to talk about it and keep the problem and not come up with it. We're going to complicate it. Next week, we're going to talk about
like 100 solutions.
Yeah. Next week, we're going to talk about flight.
Didn't we already talk about that?
I don't think we specifically talked about it. I mean, we have, but I think we could go a little deeper into it.
I think we already talked like hours about this, but okay.
Well, if you want to get people pissed off, we can go for alignment or hit points or something.
Okay, flight it is.
So anyway, everyone have a great one. We will see thee Monday, and we will still be live.